everyone, long time no see. I hope you've had a good year so far. Today's video is going to be a tutorial on how I crocheted this Batwing? I don't really know, but this top right here, it looks kind of knit. It was inspired by this knit top that I bought from Anthropologie, so I recreated it with crochet, so I'm going to show you how I did that. So for this top I used Paintbox cotton iron yarn, which came out a bit heavier than I wanted it to, so for the next top that I'm going to show you, like the example that I'm going to show you how to make, I'm using a DK yarn, and I will link the yarn that I'm using. This is the Daramore's Studio Cotton DK. I normally use the Paintbox DK yarn, but I didn't have any and I had this laying around, so I thought I would just use it. So for this top I used Paintbox cotton iron yarn. For the top I'm about to show you, I'm using a DK yarn. You can use whichever you want, just bear in mind that it'll be a bit heavier with an iron yarn. For this project I'm using a 4mm hook, and I use a 4mm hook for this one as well, but if you're using an iron yarn I would actually recommend you size up, because 4 is a little bit like stiff. It still looks fine, still is fine to wear, but if you want it a bit looser and flowier, then I would recommend using a 4.5 or a 5, but for my DK yarn I'm using a 4mm. So I constructed this top using two pieces, a front and a back piece, and then I sewed the two pieces together and then worked the sleeves directly onto those sewn pieces. I'll show you what I mean. So this is my front piece. The front and the back piece are exactly the same, so this is my front or back piece. And just to show you what it compares to my body, this is what it looks like. I will obviously let you know how many rows and chains, and I'll put the dimensions for this piece somewhere. Yeah, basically I'm just going to make two of these squares and then sew them together and then add the sleeves. So I will show you how to make this piece first. So to start the body piece, you'll want to make a chain with a multiple of 4. So for my top, I did 80 chains. So I'm going to chain 80 and then I will meet back. So once you've made your chain with a multiple of 4, at the end, you're going to want to chain an extra 5. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then we're going to put 1 double crochet into the 6th chain from our hook. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, double crochet into that 6th chain. So it should look something like this, and then you're going to want to chain 2, and then put another double crochet into that same chain. So this counts as our first V-stitch. And this chain 5 here counts as 2 foundation chains and a double crochet. So next we're going to skip 3 chains, 1, 2, 3, and then double crochet into the 4th chain. Once you've done that, chain another 2, and then put another double crochet into that same chain space. So that is now our second V-stitch. So you'll just want to keep repeating this, so skipping 3 chains, putting a double crochet into the 4th chain, chaining 2, and then putting another double crochet into the same space. Keep repeating this until you reach the end of the row. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end of my chain now, and you should have 3 chains at the end, but if you don't, it actually really doesn't matter. So in the last chain, just make 1 double crochet. So I'm going to skip these 2 chains and then double crochet in the last one. As I said, if you didn't come out with 3 exactly, it doesn't really matter. Just put a double crochet in the end, no one's going to notice. And then for the next row, you want to start by chaining 3, and then turn the work over. And then we're going to do V-stitches into each of the V-stitches. So in this gap here where the chain 2 is, you'll want to double crochet, and then chain 2, and then do another double crochet. And then into the next V-stitch, you want to double crochet, chain 2, and then do another double crochet. Okay, hopefully on this background it's a little bit easier to see, so I'll show you a few more times. but in this V-stitch you'll want to double crochet, chain 2, and then do another double crochet into the same space. And be careful not to go into the chains because the chains get pulled out when you do the V-stitches, but as we go along it will kind of start to look normal again. So just be careful that when you're doing your V-stitches you don't accidentally go into this stitch. So for this whole row and for the rest of all the rows, you'll just want to keep repeating this by putting V-stitches into the V-stitch from the previous row. So once I get to the end of this row, I'll just show you how I finish the row and then start the new one, and then that's pretty much it for the whole pattern. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end of my row now, and to finish the row, I'll do my last V-stitch in here. And then I'm going to put one double crochet into the top of the chain 3 here. So in this very first chain, I'm just going to put one double crochet. So that is what the end of your row should look like. And then to start the next row is the same as the previous row. I'm just going to chain 3, turn my work, and then keep doing V-stitches into each of these V-stitches. So I'm just going to keep repeating rows of these V-stitches until I've got the same number of rows as my first piece. I think for my first piece I did 40 rows, but I will write down somewhere exactly how many I did. So once I reach 40 rows, I will show you how to connect the two pieces and then do the sleeves. Okay, so I finished crocheting 40 rows of this V-stitch, and so to finish off, I'm just going to make a chain. And you want to leave a long enough tail to crochet this piece to the other piece. So the way I like to measure that out is to turn my work and just crochet along this edge, just super roughly, so that I know how much yarn to leave. This is very optional. You can just use a new piece of yarn to sew the two pieces together, but I like to have as minimal ends as possible, so I'm just going to use this method. So when I come to sew my two pieces together, I don't reckon I'm going to sew any more than that because I want quite a big neckline. So I'm just going to leave it there and then just leave a long tail in case I need more. I'm just going to cut it off and then undo this. So that is very optional. You don't have to do that. That is just so I know I have the right amount of yarn. You can just eyeball it if you want, but that kind of scares me, so I'm just going to measure it like that, and then you'll want to do this for both your pieces. Okay, so now I'm just going to show you how to sew both the pieces together. So I've laid them out so that one side has a tail of yarn and like the other side has another tail of yarn, so that I can use them both to sew in. So I'm just going to insert my hook. And you can attach these two pieces however you want. You can just like sew them together with a needle. I'm just going to single crochet them together because I think it's the easiest way. So I'm going to insert my hook into the very first stitch on the same piece. And then insert my hook into the top of the chain 3 in the other side. So you're basically just stitching each stitch together. Like that, and then I'm going to go through that double crochet there. And then go through the same double crochet on the other side. And then single crochet. And now for these chain spaces, you'll want to actually go through the chain. So I'm going to insert my hook through the first chain. And then through the chain on the other side. And single crochet. And then same thing with the second chain, you'll want to go through that chain as well. and then through the second chain on the other side. And so I'm just going to keep going until about here, and obviously you're going to do the same thing on the other side, so you'll just want to crochet in however wide you want your neckline to be. So say I wanted mine to be like this wide, I would just crochet until here on this side and then until here on the other side, but obviously you want to try it on first and see whether that is actually how big you want it, and then you can adjust, remove stitches, or add stitches if you need. As I said, you can just use like a needle and thread the yarn through and then sew it together. I just kind of like single crocheting it. Okay, so as you can see here, I've just single crocheted up until the second V-stitch, so that double crochet there, and I'm going to do the same thing on the other side and then try it on and see whether that's as big as I need it to be. Okay, so I have my two pieces here sewn together, and I'm just going to try it on so that I can figure out whether this is the right size for my neckline. And I reckon I like this size here, so I'm just going to leave it like this, but if you need to add more stitches to make it smaller, then go ahead and do that. But I am happy with how this is, so I'm going to get started on the sleeves. I'm going to just pull the strands through to like tie off the ends. Like that. And I'll sew those in later, potentially. Okay, so to start the sleeve, you're going to want to open your piece up so it's laying flat, and you'll want the single crochets to be facing you because that's going to be on the inside of the top. So to get started, I'm going to go to the very end or the bottom of the piece, and I'm going to get a new ball of yarn or a new piece of yarn and make a slip knot. And so we're going to be now working this V-stitch into the sides of the top. So I'm going to start with this first stitch here. So I'm going to start with a standing double crochet, I think it's what it's called, but I'm going to put my slip knot on my hook, yarn over, and then insert my hook into the first chain here. So the first chain of that beginning chain 3. Like that, and then I'm going to yarn over and pull through and then make a double crochet like normal. Like that. You can just like insert your hook in chain 3 if you want. I like doing a standing double crochet because I think it looks nicer, but it's completely up to you, whatever you're able to do. And then now into that same stitch or same space here, we're going to do our first V-stitch. So I'm going to yarn over, insert my hook into there, make a double crochet. I'm going to chain 2 and then double crochet into the same space. And then I'm going to skip a space and I'm going to work another V-stitch into the next space. So double crochet, chain 2, and then double crochet. Like that. So you can see here I've got my first double crochet, my V-stitch, I've skipped a space here, and now I'm working my V-stitch into the next space. So again, I'm going to skip a space, work my next V-stitch into the next space here. Skip a space, work my next V-stitch. So it should look something like this. It looks really seamless. It's kind of hard to tell where the side of the top is. So if I just zoom out, I can show you kind of the big view. So if I were to fold my top up again, we are actually working down this side here. We're going to be working all the way along, up, across, through this, all the way to the other side. So you'll just want to keep crocheting these V-stitches, skipping a space, crocheting, skipping a space, until you reach the other side. So I've reached my seam now. I've done a V-stitch into the space here. I'm just going to skip this one and V-stitch like normal. So just kind of ignore the seam, it doesn't really matter. And then just continue crocheting like normal. Okay, so I'm nearly at the end of the other piece. I've crocheted all the way along the two pieces that I sewed together. So now I'm just going to work my last few V-stitches. So I'm going to skip this space, work my V-stitch, and now because of the number of rows I have, yours might be different, I'm not sure. So I've got my V-stitch in here and then one last space, so I'm not going to put a V-stitch in here, I'm just going to do one double crochet in the very end here. So I'm going to go through this stitch just because this stitch is kind of pulled out. I don't want it to pull out anymore. So I'm just going to go through one of these chains here. It doesn't really matter. You really can't tell once the piece is sewn together. So I'm going to do my double crochet. And that is the first row of one of the sleeves done. This is what it should look like. It's really actually hard to tell where the seam is because there is no seam, but yeah. So now this is where I'm going to start doing the decreases for my sleeves. If you want your sleeves to be bigger, I'm not sure how it would look because I've not tried it, but you can just keep doing a few more rows of this. However, I'm going to start decreasing because I want it to get smaller immediately. So to decrease, I'm going to chain 3. I'm going to turn my work. And now I'm going to do one double crochet into the very same stitch. Like that. And then I'm going to skip this first V-stitch completely and just do my first V-stitch into the second one. So that's the first V-stitch. I'm just going to go straight into the second one here. Double crochet, chain 2, double crochet. And that is my first decrease. Now I'm just going to keep V-stitching like normal into each of the V-stitches until the very end of the row. And for my pattern for the sleeves, I decreased at the beginning of every row. So I've nearly reached the end of my second row, and as normal, I'm just going to V-stitch into the last stitch. As I mentioned, I only decrease at the beginning of each row. So I'm just going to finish this row off like normal, doing my last V-stitch into the last V-stitch there, and then doing one double crochet into this beginning double crochet here. And then to decrease again, I chain 3, turn the work, double crochet into the same stitch, skip this very first V-stitch, and then V-stitch straight into the second one. I'm just going to keep crocheting this row until I reach the very end, and I'll show you how to work in the V-stitch into this decrease, and then that's pretty much all you need to know for the sleeve, and you'll just keep repeating rows and rows of this until you reach the length of sleeve that you want. So I've nearly reached the end of my row, and this was the decrease that I did in the previous row. So to finish this row, I'm just going to V-stitch into this last V-stitch like normal. And then to finish off the row, you just skip this double crochet and double crochet straight into the beginning chain 3. Like that, and that should be the end of your row. And then for the next row, of course, I'm going to start with a decrease and then work all my V-stitches, and I'm just going to keep repeating rows and rows of this until I reach the length that I want my sleeve. I obviously will let you know how many I ended up doing, and if you want, you can check out the written pattern that I will put in the description to help you follow along with my tutorial. I will write it based on what I ended up doing, but you can obviously adjust it to whatever you need. Okay, it's now the next day, and I've been crocheting for quite a while. This is how much of the sleeve I've done. And I actually lied to you when I said you're going to want to keep repeating these rows until you reach the length of your sleeve. That is incorrect. You're going to want to keep repeating these decrease rows until you reach how wide you want your sleeve. So for example, I've crocheted 25 rows, and when I fold my piece in half so I can like see what it's going to look like as the top, I can see that this is how wide my sleeve is going to be. So I'm just going to try it on. Okay, so when I've tried my top on and I fold my sleeve, this is basically how wide it's going to be. So at this point, I'm gonna stop doing rows of decreases, but if you want your sleeve to be even skinnier, or if you want it to be wider, then you can do more or less rows of the decrease. So if you do more rows of the decrease, then it's gonna be smaller. If you do less rows, then it's obviously gonna be wider. So as I said, I did 25 rows of this decrease for my sleeve, and now I'm gonna stop decreasing and just do rows and rows of the normal V-stitch without decreases until I reach the actual length that I want my sleeve to be. So to switch back to doing normal rows of the V-stitches, you want to start your row just like normal, so chain 3, turn your work, and instead of doing that double crochet into the same stitch, you're just going to V-stitch into the next V-stitch. So just to show you what that looks like up close, I'm going to chain 3, turn my work, and before for the decreases we were double crocheting straight into that first stitch, but instead we're just going to V-stitch into the first V-stitch like we were doing for the main body pieces. And you want to keep repeating this for the rest of your row. So I'm at the end of my first non-decrease row, and as normal you'll just want to double crochet straight into that chain 3, skipping that double crochet, and then start your row the same as you did for this row. So chain 3, turn the work, and then do not double crochet in that first stitch because we're not decreasing anymore, just V-stitch straight into that next stitch. So I'm going to keep repeating these rows of V-stitches until I reach the length I want for my sleeve, and this time you'll actually want to crochet until the length of your sleeve, and I will let you know how many rows I end up doing at the end. Okay, so it's been a few hours now and I've finished crocheting the first sleeve. I did 25 rows of the decreasing rows, and then I just did 20 rows of like normal V-stitches, so I have 45 rows for the sleeve in total. And again, I will give you a try on. So this is what my sleeve looks like. So now I'm going to repeat the same thing on this side, starting on this corner and working on the edge of the top. Also, for the leftover yarn, I'm going to fold my top in half and then pull out a strand that is the length of the side of the top, so that I can use that later on to sew it so I have less ends to weave in. This is obviously optional. You can just attach a new ball later or use a new ball of yarn, but I like minimal ends, so that is about the same length, and then I'm going to cut it at the top so it's like double, because you can never be too safe. Okay, so I have a really long piece here later on to sew the side of the top up. Also, a little hack that I'm now just discovering is I can actually just attach my yarn to this little end here and use that to make the sleeve, and that is one less end for me to weave, so I'm gonna do that. Okay, so I've attached my ball of yarn to this end that was left here, and I'm just going to use that to start crocheting. Okay, so again, I'm going to start by double crocheting in that very first chain or stitch there, and then making a V-stitch in the very first space. Like that, and then I'm going to skip the next space and then V-stitch in the space after. Okay, so it's now the next day and I've finally finished crocheting the other sleeve for my top. So this is what my top looks like when I fold it in half. And now it's time to sew the pieces together. So as I said, I left a really long tail to sew the edge up, and I'm just going to use this, but if you didn't do that, you can just use a new ball of yarn. And we're going to sew starting from the sleeve down the side to the bottom. This part is really simple. You can use any kind of stitch you want, mattress stitch or a regular stitch, I don't know what it's called, but you can use any method you want because it doesn't really make a difference since the seam is going to be inside the top. So I've got my top here, and you want to make sure that your seam is on the outside when you fold it so that when you sew this together your seam is also on the same side. And this is the end of my sleeve. I'm just going to grab my needle. And as I mentioned, I'm just going to stitch these two pieces together, trying to line up the rows as best as I can. So to start, I'm going to start in the very top of the chain 3. And I'm going to do a mattress stitch, but you can do whatever stitch you prefer. And don't forget to make sure that your rows are lined up. Okay, so I've nearly sewn all the way till the end, and now you want to just make sure that the corners of your front and back piece are aligned. So you'll want to look for that first chain 3. Here I can see that that is a double crochet. So that is the start of the back piece, and then you'll want to line that up with the start of the front piece. Then once you get to the end, I'm just going to secure it with a knot, but you secure it however you normally secure your pieces. And then once I'm done, I'll just weave in this end and do the same thing to the other side, and that is pretty much the top done. Okay, so I'm just going to repeat the same thing to the other side, and then I'll be back with you when I'm done. I'll probably add a note before this, but I recommend that you block your piece before you stitch it together, just for the sake of getting the video done quickly. I'm just gonna stitch it straight away, but I would recommend blocking it because as you can see where you attach the sleeve, it kind of cinches in a bit, so blocking will fix that. But that's completely up to you. I will probably just block it once I wash it for the first time. Okay, so I finished sewing up the top and this is what it looks like. I still need to weave in the ends and block it and everything, so it is a little bit smaller and like cropped and tighter than it would be, but once you block and stretch out and everything, it'll be nice and flowy. So as usual, I will leave a little written pattern in the description, so if you do want to follow that along with the video, then feel free to do that. If you have any questions or comments, then let me know and I will try to reply. And yeah, if you make anything, tag me, love to see it. So I think that's all for now. Bye!